On now, and we are started. Salem as an Inspiration is our first lecture of our What's the Story series. In 2021, we are bringing a little bit of levity to a very difficult year and focusing on inspiring stories about the region, Salem, and of course, the House of the Seven Gables. From cooking demonstrations to summer yoga on the lawn to a Monopoly tournament, we're excited to share many wonderful tales with everybody throughout the year. And the House of the Seven Gables, as many of you know, was founded by a woman named Caroline Emerton, and she was certainly somebody who loved a good story herself. In 1908, she purchased the famed Harborside Mansion and capitalized on the fame of Nathaniel Hawthorne to attract visitors to the museum. She took these proceeds from museum visitors and turned them into funding for her settlement house here in the Derby Street neighborhood. She provided classes for English, cooking, sewing, industrial arts, and so many others. And in the early 20th century, the settlement house helped new Americans settle into their lives in a new country. And today we help to carry on Emerton's vision by providing all sorts of educational opportunities and preserving 2 acres of history here in Salem. As many of you know, this work takes effort, time, and money. So we really wanted to send a special thank you to our members who are here today. If you're not a member, we would love to have you join us. We'll be reopening in early April, so lots of opportunities to join us for our garden tour or guided tour, or just to keep coming to our lectures. And we also really wanted to send a special thank you to everybody who made a donation in addition to their attendance and registration for coming tonight too. We'll have a link for donations and memberships in the chat, but this is the kind of support that allows us to keep sharing history and stories with a wide audience, and we greatly appreciate it. With that, I would love to introduce Brunonia Barry. She's an internationally acclaimed best-selling author who not only lives in Salem, but is truly inspired by the city that surrounds her. We've been very lucky here at the Gables to occasionally peek underneath our wisteria arbor and see Ms. Barry in action. Her best-selling books include The Lace Reader, The Map of True Places, and The Fifth Petal. And all I'm going to say is that our speaker has a little surprise in store for each of you tonight. So prepare yourselves towards the end of the talk for something very special that nobody else has heard yet. And besides her work as a writer, Ms. Barry has also served as a chairperson for Salem Athenaeum's Writers Committee, an executive director for the Salem Literary Festival, as a member of Grub Street's Development Committee. So Brunonia, thank you so much for being here with us tonight to kick off our 2021 lecture series. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Julie. That's quite a nice introduction. I'm going to introduce myself even a little more. I see a lot of faces I know, which is great, and a lot that I don't know. So nice to meet you. I'm from Marblehead originally, right across the harbor, right across Salem Harbor. And it was behind St. Andrew's Church where I live. So it was almost, just as you come into town on that hill up there. And we spent a lot of time playing in Salem Harbor, and a friend of mine had a whaler in Salem Harbor, and we used to just scoot over. And I often came to the House of Seven Gables in the whaler because before you were 16 years old and could drive a car, you could drive a boat. And so it was a sense of freedom for us kids, and I just loved the place. And when I was 16, I got my first job, and it was at the House of Seven Gables. And Julie knows this story, and maybe many of you do too, but I always have to tell it. I got a job as a substitute tour guide at the end of the season when other people went back to college. And my mother got me the job, and I was very proud to have it. And I was quite enthusiastic about my storytelling. And so enthusiastic that the second day on the job, the manager at the time greeted me at the bottom of the back staircase as we came down from the secret staircase. I had them; they were enthralled. I thought I had them in the palm of my hands, and I came down, and she goes, "Miss Barry, you're dismissed." So for embellishment, and I have to say that's when my mother said she knew I was going to be a fiction writer. I think it was, so I have to credit the House of Seven Gables for my career, actually. That and University of New Hampshire, where I tried at first to be a journalism student, and they quickly moved me over to fiction. So you can see a pattern here. I always wanted to be a writer, and I'm going to tell you the story in a form of writing tips that I've learned along the way. I've done a lot of studying um, at all the different places I lived. And I actually left for school when I was 18 for college, and then really didn't come back until I was 45, except for vacations, twice a year, summer and winter. And every summer we would say, we're moving back here, wherever we were. We're moving back to Salem, Marblehead, North Shore area. And then every winter when we would come back from Los Angeles, we'd go, oh no, not this year. No, maybe next year. So this went on and on. Meanwhile, the places I moved were, I lived in Dublin for a while, Chicago, Manhattan, Sonoma County, California, and 20 years in Los Angeles, which I loved. When we were ready to come back here, for sure. The reason we came back eventually is that my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And we'd been telling him we were coming back. And at one point he said, if you're coming, come now, because I need you. And he had been my mom's caregiver for quite a while, and she was wheelchair bound with rheumatoid arthritis. So we very quickly moved back and tried to find a place on the North Shore to live. And we started out in Marblehead, where I grew up, and then sort of quietly started looking in Salem, because the thought was, where do you go after LA? LA's an odd place, but it's a very open, as far as I was concerned, wonderful. And for my character of Towner that I wrote in the Lace Reader, it was as far as she could go from here and not fall off the face of the earth. So that was my description of Los Angeles, even to myself when I moved there. Now, mine came out of an adventure. Hers was from a trauma, but mine was as far as having adventures in each of those places. I had a ton of jobs, not all writing. Didn't get my first book published till I was 57. So the jobs included, I used to work at Children's Island Day Camp when I was a kid. I loved that job. And then I worked in the World Trade Center when it opened, and then on to San Francisco and had a job restoring and making stained glass windows. And then moved to Los Angeles and got a job reading scripts and booking sound stages for music videos. And then finally went into tech and was with a company when we moved back here called Lotus, which was in Cambridge. So it all, one thing morphed to another, but the through line really was I was studying writing the whole time. So the first tip I want to share about writing that I picked up along the way was write what you know. And so when I came back, as I said, we were looking for an open, welcoming community that was entrepreneurial, and we wanted someplace historical. We sort of missed that. But a place with a certain sophistication, but a small town feel, which Salem definitely has. I mean, the longer you live here, the smaller town it seems, or when anyone reads my books, they always think Salem's a very small town, which is odd because we know it's a small city. But it has the same issues. It has a small town feel and big city issues, which I like because, as you can see, I lived in a lot of different cities. I'm going to read my impression of town when we first came back, which made its way into the character of Towner in my first book, The Lace Reader. And I always say I saw Salem with very new eyes. Here it is. Towner has come back just as I did. She's come back to Salem when her great aunt disappears. And she wouldn't come back, except this was someone she was very attached to. And so she's come back and ended up taking a ferry in from Boston after flying and spending a little time in Boston. And so I walked from the ferry station, then up to, up past the house of Seven Gables to Derby Wharf and Pickering Wharf, and then up toward the common where her grandmother or her aunt lived. So here's the description that I wrote almost from my own experience. A kid steps in front of me, asking directions to the common. There are 3 kids, actually, 2 girls and a boy, all in black. Goths is my first thought, but no, definitely young witches. What gives it away finally is the Blessed Bee t-shirt worn by one of the girls. I point, follow the yellow brick road, I say. Actually, it's a tour line painted on the street and it's red, not yellow, but they get the idea. A man in a huge Frankenstein head walks by, handing out flyers. I want to call for the continuity person, but this isn't a movie set. A cruiser slows. The cop looks at the kids and then at me. The boy spots the witch logo on the side of the police car, gives the cop a thumbs up. Frankenstein hands each of us a Freaky Tours flyer and sneezes inside his big hollow head. Universal Tours without the budget is what Beezer calls the place. I heard from my brother that Salem is trying to shed its image as witch city. He told me last year that they were attempting to pass an ordinance to limit the number of haunted houses that can be erected within one city block. From the looks of things, that ordinance didn't pass. So that was exactly my impression when I first came back to Salem. And along with, it wasn't a brother of mine that said Universal Tours, it was my husband, Gary. And we said, this place is for us. So we bought a house in the McIntyre district and I started walking around Salem, and that's how all of the inspiration for all of the different books was born. One thing they tell you about writing is that you need to develop a unique perspective. And I think it's true that no two fiction writers ever see this place the same way. They don't see things in general the same way because we're the sum of our attitudes and our experiences, I think. The same way no people ever tell the same story. I won't tell, this won't be long, but I have a story about my brother and I trying to compare notes on what happened to us as children when I first got back. Something we hadn't had the luxury of doing, and we could never agree on the same story about anything, even sometimes down to who did something I thought he did and he was sure I did, was guilty for, and actually it was me. So I don't even want to talk about that is, but I think, you see it with eyewitnesses never have the same story either. So my books wouldn't be like anyone else's. And I think we all know how many Salem books there are out there. I read them all the time. People send them to me a lot. But I have read everything I could find, and it's never the same story, same point of view at all. So I think my strong suit, I've been told, is creating a world of a story. Mine's a little different from what you might expect. It's a little mysterious, quite dark. Not really the same, I think, as maybe someone would, but it certainly creates an atmosphere. But it's all some things I've picked up from keeping my eyes open around here. The next bit of advice about writing is to be authentic. And I think that's true about any writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You really need to strive for authenticity. It takes a lot of time and observation to discover the layers of this place. It really does. And I think if you, we all know, we've all read books on Salem that, from people who haven't spent very much time here. I think there are so many layers to this place that every book I write is different, and every time is different. The Salem has changed from one book to the other, and to the new one. And I have to say that if I wrote a book this year, it would be a completely different book from anything I've ever written before. I haven't started one yet. I was working on something that I needed to finish that I'm going to share a little bit with you about later. So part of being authentic, I think, with a real place, you have to be true to the world of your story. And I think with a real place, that lends some borders and boundaries that are good, in my case, certainly. You can write fantasy, mystery, literary fiction, any of that. But when you create, and you can create any rules to a story that you want, but with a real place, you have to stick to what's kind of real. And I've taken some liberty, so I'll tell you some of the funny stories about that. The scariest time for me is the first draft, so it's wonderful to be bound by location and by the ocean. I have to say the ocean plays a huge part in any of my stories. There are things I've taken liberties on. There was a swim in the Lace Reader through one of the infamous Salem tunnels that the ship's owners once used ostensibly to store their imports and avoid British taxes. You know, the tunnels are still secret. I know there are people that claim they know where they are. I did speak to a woman who says one of them ran under her house. And I created a swim from up from the common down to what was the rigging shed at the Friendship, which would be a very long swim for anyone but an Olympic athlete. But I got away with that. What I didn't get away with was my house description, even though it was, and this is in the Lace Reader, this is Eva's house, which is on the common, was vivid enough, even though it was based on 3 different houses, my grandmother's house in Swampscott, the house we had bought in the McIntyre, and a house that we did look at on Salem Common when we were looking for a house. People figured out which house it was anyway, and they went up and rang the doorbell, and that didn't sit very well with people. So I've learned not to do that. Anything I mention besides a public venue is now a fake place. And I say that, you know, this is not a real address, don't go there. But for real places, people are welcome to go there. And I think I hope it's helped tourism a little. I know it certainly helps me, and I meet people all the time who are coming to look for specific things. The first book club I did, I sat at the tavern at the Hawthorne Hotel and met with a group of nuns from Beverly. And we talked about the book for quite a while. It was great. It was wonderful fun. But they left me early while it was still light out because they wanted to go see the statue of Roger Conant. And any of you read the book, you'll know that I talk about an angle on the statue that's slightly pornographic. And I just love the fact that the nuns left to go see the statue. That was fun for me. So I think as another tip, they say respect the history of place. And I think we have to do that. You do a lot of research, but you never let it show. I would say I do about a third of each book is research. And it takes quite a bit. It doesn't end up in the book, but that's a third of the time I spend writing a book is doing research. And some of it I just get captured by, you know, here's another place that, you know, I got captured by oak trees in the last book and by tree communication. There was a book written about that. While I was writing this book. And so I can get very sidetracked. I also got captured by singing bowls, which a massage therapist of mine used on me in Marblehead. And so these are the things that give you the ideas. But I also get very captured by the locations and by walking around the city. So to me, this is part of listening to the muse. And I'm going to tell you a little story about the first book and how it came out. The first book hit the bestseller charts pretty quickly, which was wonderful for me. And it took me on a tour that lasted 6 months. Unfortunately for me, I hadn't started my second book. And by the time I got back, I had no idea it was a year in, and they had given me a 2-year deadline. On tour, and the tour had several different components. One of them was even over Europe. It was great fun, but I wasn't getting anything done. I found that I really couldn't write on the road. And so while I was at one of the book shows in, I think it was Oregon, I ran into Andre Dubus, who's a local writer you may all know. And he was kind enough to escort me around because I was a new writer. And we got talking about my deadline. And he said, "Oh, don't pay any attention to deadlines. I never do. I wouldn't do that. Don't be ridiculous." And I said, "Okay." And I got back and I called my agent. She said, "How are you doing with the new book?" And I said, "I've got nothing." And she said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, Andre Dubus told me I didn't have to pay any attention to deadlines." And she said, "Well, he's an Oprah pick. And so far you're not. Write the book." So on that day, I got into my car and drove down to the wharf where I bought coffee. I was quite a coffee drinker in those days, several cups of very heavily caffeinated coffee, which I bought at Jaho, I think, at that point. And then I went to sit on a bench and watch the Friendship, because I'd been watching the Friendship since it was being built. I'd seen it when the masts were on. The mast, I think at one point, was hit by lightning, came off, things. So at this point, though, they were rigging it. And I sat and watched one of the men, or one of the riggers, climbing to the top. It didn't seem like he had any OSHA protection. I'm sure he did. I asked about it right afterward, and I told you they're protected. But as if he were, the words came to mind, a dancer or a spider. And I thought that was the image I got, but I was so nervous watching him, because he was really flying from one thing to another, or that was my impression, that I immediately quit drinking caffeinated coffee and haven't had a cup since. But that gave me the first character in the Map of True Places. And that was the character of Hawk. And but I still didn't have a story. But I had been invited by the House of the Seven Gables to do some writing in their garden. And I'd been meaning to do it. And by way of inspiration, I just took a walk, just ambled on down, sat in the gardens for a while. And under the wisteria, that was a wonderful part of it. And I found a new character. One of the main characters was waiting for me at the Gables, actually. His name was Finch, and he's a Hawthorne scholar. And I sat in the Gables, and the cat, I met the cat, I met Dusty, right? Yeah, and all sorts of characters. But I was sitting in the Gables and I thought, what if, the big writer's question is always what if. We're always coming up with what if stories. So what if there was someone here who lived right across from the Gables, who suffered from Parkinson's, Alzheimer's crossover, which is what my dad was suffering at the time. And since he was living right across from Seven Gables and he was a Hawthorne scholar, he began to believe that he was Nathaniel Hawthorne. And that was the beginning of the Map of True Places. I did quite a bit of writing in the gardens. And I think for both the Lace Reader and the Map of True Places, we had the opening parties at the House of Seven Gables, which was wonderful. So thank you, as usual. Some other places that inspired different bits of different books. Eva's house, as I said, sat on Salem Common. The tea room was actually based on the Wenham Tea House, where I used to go with my grandmother when I was a kid. Jolie Tea would be a great place for the new tea house. And then Eva's gardens were actually the gardens of the Ropes Mansion. So, you put these things together. Hamilton Hall, I attended dances there, cotillions as a teenager. And the images of the lace came from a lecture I went to at Penn, which was Marta Cottrell, who had written a book called The Laces of Ipswich. And I was so fascinated by this lace making industry that was run completely by women that I read the book, and then I went to Ipswich and started doing some research there. So you can see where some of these come from. The Map of True Places also, and many of my books have islands in them. The ocean is such a big part of any story I write, because we're bordered, bounded by it, I say, but it's, it's magical, and it's also dangerous, and it's, it is almost a character in any of the stories. So there's quite a bit in the Map of True Places about Baker's Island. And I had a friend whose family owned a place on Baker's Island when I was in college, and I got fascinated by the place. And a place where they still live in the past, basically, that's always appealed to me. And then there's Yellow Dog Island, which is sort of based on Children's Island, where I worked, just topographically. And then in the newest book, The Island of Mothers and Daughters, there's another island. So you see that kind of running through. I have to say I'm a very visual writer, and my writing room, if you read the article that they did this last week, is full of objects. And I cleaned it out between books, and then I fill it up again with everything that inspires the books. So I also have 4 big windows that look out at the gardens of Salem. Not mine, I can't garden for anything, but my neighbors have wonderful gardens. So I look down the street toward town, and but everything, you know, I have everything from lace to singing bowls. At this time with the Island of Mothers and Daughters, I have a lot of psychology books, which is more interesting than actually, I have a lot of books just around anyway. But I have pictures of my mother, pictures of mothers and daughters. And that was actually inspired by, in a completely different way. It starts in Marblehead and then it makes its way several miles out to an island that really doesn't exist, called Night Blind Island, that they're renaming the Island of Mothers and Daughters. And I'm going to read you a bit of that in a minute. I think I will tell you one more thing, and that's about creating characters themselves. Um, I'm a very visual writer, as I said, and that's why I fill my writing space with the things that inspire each story. But I also, and you know, I had writers in doing this, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I think in order, you're supposed to write with all your senses. And I don't use a lot of music while I'm writing because I just have too great an urge to dance. So I listen to it in my non-writing time and the before and after. But I lived in New York. I see one of them here with a group of actors. And as a way to know your characters, I was having a lot of trouble. I was studying screenwriting at the time, and I could not get characters right. And one day, the three of them started acting out my screenplay and behaving like the characters. And I thought, what a great idea. And I picked up gestures from them that I put in the screenplay. And I thought, this is very interesting. And I decided when I started writing, it's like method acting or method writing, I guess. But I would try it. And so I walk around as the characters I'm creating. Very easy thing to do when I knew no one in town. It's a little more difficult now. And so you may see me down. It's much easier in October because, you know, everyone's walking around in costumes, not being themselves anyway. But it's something I always do. And I have to say, going down to the wharf as May Whitney, who doesn't like to be off of her island for a minute, is very different from going as Lindley, who is a shoplifter. And so, you know, there are things I didn't really try. I drew the line somewhere. I didn't shoplift, though I considered it at Pyramid Books because I had the card of my brother, who's a criminal defense attorney, in my pocket. He shudders when he hears that, but I didn't do it. And also, I didn't do exorcisms at Winter Island like Cal did either. So I don't go that far. But I did invite a group of writers from Writer Unboxed, which is also hosted by the House of Seven Gables, who come here from all over the world. We went to the Witch's Brew restaurant and we all appeared as our own characters for an entire lunch, and it was hilarious. So so I recommend it if you want to start writing. I recommend trying to inhabit the characters for just a little while. Anyway, I would say one thing about Salem that I mentioned before. You can't step into the same river twice, and each book is so different because the place in 2007 was not the same as 2008 when I wrote The Map of True Places, and certainly not the same as 2019 when The Island of Mothers and Daughters is set. And if I wrote one now, who knows what it would be. So as I mentioned, it's not an easy thing to do. I want to read you some of The Island of Mothers and Daughters. So I think I will do that again. I think one of the things you ask your characters, and say, I see Salem as a character. And one of the things you always ask is, what does the character want and what's keeping them from getting it? I think Salem wanted different things from each story. And so I can't wait to see what it wants next. It's a fascinating place. But I'm going to go on. I'm running a little bit late for what I wanted to do because I always get going on something I didn't plan. Anyway, I think I'll move over to the new book because you're going to get preview of it. It's in edits now. We don't have a date a pub date yet. Everything's been pushed back a little bit this year, so we're running late, but it is in edits. And I'm going to read you something from it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll read you some passages from it, just so you can get an idea. And then we'll go on to questions and answers, I guess. Okay. The book is called The Island of Mothers and Daughters. And as I said earlier, it starts out in Marblehead, and with 4 women and their daughters heading out. Here's my elevator pitch for it that I wrote about 15 minutes ago, no, about 2 hours ago. After creating a marketing plan for a mother-daughter retreat on a distant island that once housed a summer camp, and unaware of the island's mysterious history, 4 mothers embark on a proof of concept weekend with their very reluctant 13-year-old daughters. What could possibly go wrong? So that's the beginning. I'm going to start by reading you their brochure for what they consider is going to be their new business, this retreat that they think is a brilliant idea. And it is, but some things do go wrong. So maybe not. Well, I won't tell you more. You have to read it to find that out. The Island of Mothers and Daughters brochure prototype. Escape, unplug, and unwind on the Island of Mothers and Daughters. Recreate the camp experience you had as girls and get to know each other all over again. Rid yourselves of everyday concerns at our private island paradise while indulging in a few of your wish list. First time I've read this, modern luxuries. Enjoy 100% or local, organic source cuisine prepared by our award-winning chef. Yoga classes in our secret garden, arts and crafts, swimming, sailing, lobster bakes, campfire sing-alongs, and real-life ghost stories collected from the island's pirate history. Beautiful panoramic location, far from the pressures of daily life. The perfect spot for the revitalization of the family values you most cherish. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, great for any age. It's never too late to renew that precious mother-daughter bond. Wonderful for stepmoms as well. Group rates available. Gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, keto, paleo, pescatarian, flexitarian, whole30, and allergy-free menus on request. So that's their prototype. And there are crossouts in here. So if you heard me stumble over something that they had made an arrow, reverse these 2 things. That's the writing of the Mothers and Daughters. So that's where we're headed. We are headed to the Island of Mothers and Daughters for their proof of concept weekend. And as I said, the daughters don't want to be here. They are being dragged against their 13-year-old wills. They have parties they'd like to go to. It's the 4th of July. They want to go to parties. And they're being dropped off by a husband of one of the women named Tucker. So this is on the voyage, and there's already one girl who's seasick, one woman who's seasick. And there's also a little dog running around that is very pesky, named Myron. Look, Tucker yells loud enough to be heard over the engines, pointing toward Stellwagen Bank and a flotilla of commercial whale watching boats anchored around the marine sanctuary. In the distance, beyond the line of vessels, a whale breaches. Kat smells the creature before she sees him, the fishy odor of decaying krill carried on the spume. The girls rush to the bow to get a better view. Tucker cuts the engine, and they stare as the humpback breaches again, this time flying through the air, slamming the surface of the dark water very close to the boat, and sending a huge splash of ocean over the gunwale. The magnificent creature lies prone on the surface, so close that Kat can count the barnacles on his side and stare into one dark eye. After several seconds, he does a slow roll, exposing more of his gigantic white underbelly and fins. And with all perspective lost in the vastness of ocean, it seems to Kat that he's staring directly at her with the opposite eye and giving her the same attitude. She flashes on the forgotten memory of a distant relative of her mother's, summer visiting from Germany, his pale body floating for what seemed days in their saltwater pool. Without a common language to distinguish intention, he always appeared to be looking at Kat with the same amused detachment she sees now. as if he knew the secret she held so tightly, but couldn't be counted on to keep it. Today, Myron the dog's reaction to the whale is equally disturbing. Instincts taking over and forgetting his recent close call, the dog barks nonstop and squirms away from Steph. He leaps up to the stern, yipping and jumping at the creature until Steph, terrified he'll jump overboard, grabs him and tosses him a little too enthusiastically down the stairway into the cabin below, latching the door to prevent his escape and muffling his continued barks. The dog wakes Jen, sending her staggering up the stairs, pounding on the door to get to the deck, squinting at the harsh light as she exits, her normally rosy complexion reflecting the water's greenish tinge. As if to remind them all that he's the main attraction here, the whale slaps his giant flippers against the water, raising both foam and phosphorescence and sprinkling them all with a salty summer rain before he rolls once more and dives directly under the boat. The last thing visible as he disappears is his forked, barnacle-ridden tail. Everyone holds a collective breath, bracing for impact. One by one, they glance at each other, summoning memories of Moby Dick and every other whale horror story they've ever heard, passed down through their families or friends, or from men who once hunted humpbacks in these same waters. The strike doesn't come. The four mothers stand together, gazing into the empty ocean in the estimated spot of the whale's next breach. And then, when it doesn't happen, rearranging their positions to cover each direction, north, south, east, and west, unable to rest until they've seen the breach, the same way they once checked on their sleeping newborn daughters, not resting until they assured themselves of that next breath. Then, as unexpectedly as it appeared, the whale is gone. The women stand for a long time looking into the emptiness stretching in every direction. The girls scramble down from the bow and come back to show the photos Ellie has snapped, as if to prove that the whole experience was real and not some shared saltwater-induced hallucination. The shots include a selfie with the whale, proof enough, though it appears photoshopped. Cal can't quite figure out how Ellie was able to get the angle captured, but she's vaguely impressed by the digital possibilities of it all. Ellie tries unsuccessfully to post the photo, but they are far beyond any cell towers now. The danger past, Steph opens the cabin door and frees Myron, who runs in circles around the deck, barking accusingly at each of them. How much farther is this place? Jen groans, pushing the pressure points on her seasickness bracelet. Not too far, Kat says. You're lying, aren't you? Jen says, starting back to the cabin. You're better off up here, Kat says, repositioning a deck chair so it faces the horizon as Mimi moves her seat aside to make room. Jen staggers toward the chair as the boat crests a swell and dips dangerously forward, as if the sea has dropped several feet, taking her stomach with her. She changes course, barely making it to the side of the boat before she throws up. Kat and Mimi rush to her side, one steadying her, the other holding back her hair the way friends do, as Devil's Tail crests another swell. That's it. And I have to say, you should always practice before you do this, because what's easy to write is not that easy to say sometimes. But that's it. Should we go on to questions maybe?
Absolutely. I think I will switch over to gallery view now for questions so that we can all see each other. And oh my goodness, thank you. I think all of us are now eagerly anticipating your book. The only question I currently have in the chat is, may we purchase and get a signed book when it's ready?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
So clearly the interest is there, but we would be more than welcome to. I will definitely try to scoot through and see if somebody raises their hand. I'll be happy to unmute you for a question or a comment. And we can also take those questions in the chat as well. So this is your opportunity.
Patricia's?
Oh, go. Let's give her a moment to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, Brunonia.
Hi.
Hi, this is Patricia. Yeah, and I've read all of your books. Do you have a theme or a message in mind as you write each book, or would you say that it's mostly driven by the setting or by the characters? What do you think is the hallmark of your writing?
Mhm. I find the message as I'm writing it. It's usually prompted by a setting or a character who sort of appears and wants to be heard. And it's not always the character that's the main character either. I thought Finch, the Hawthorne scholar, would be the main character when I was writing The Map of Two Places. And I tried to walk around as Hawthorne might, and the Hawthorne walking around in 2010 is very different. Um, but it turned out that the main voice was from his daughter. And so, and the same thing happened in The Lace Reader. Eva, who is the great aunt or grandmother, whichever, in The Lace Reader um, was meant to be the main character, but Towner's voice was louder. And so characters sort of start to appear, and they're the ones that have something to say, I think. In The Fifth Petal, I wanted Rose as a character that is being blamed for a crime she didn't commit, and has been blamed for a prior crime, and she's an ex colonial history scholar who has had a trauma that made her lose her mind, and she's become homeless. And so the question, this story came to me much sooner, and her character was Callie, who was a girl she took care of when Rose was younger. And she had the louder voice here, but the question was very quick, and it was, could a witch hunt happen again in Salem? Because I don't think so. I think it can happen anywhere, but I don't think it can happen the same way. So if it did, what would it look like? And in this case, so it's usually the question which comes to me at a very early stage. I'll write about the characters for sometimes up to 30, 40 pages before they start to come clear, and I start to realize who's the main character and what they have to tell me. So this was, I've always said things like that are less likely to happen here because we have this generational guilt, I think. My family goes back to the 1600s with William Sprague, who came to Salem in 1628 to chart the Western Territory for the British government. And but from that point on, that's my mother's side. My father's side is Irish and came much later. And they both have found their ways into these stories. But I think we have a generational guilt that we walk around with, and part of it's because the tourists come for the witch trials, and so we're reminded, whether we want to move on, we're reminded all the time. But I think that's a good thing to have. So that was the way the theme of The Fifth Petal manifested, and it's always different. It really is. That in the Map of True Places, the question, which inspired the theme, was what do we, what is family really, and what do we owe an ailing and aging parent, was a big question in the beginning between father and daughter. And of course, that had been a question of mine as well, as I became a caregiver in those last years. So anyone going through that will understand what I mean. Anyway, so that's how it comes, and it comes slowly, and sometimes you feel like you're never going to get it, and the books never begin where I think they're going to, but I always know the ending. So I have to say, the ending in Lace Reader surprised me, because I tried to engineer it, but if I'd listened, the ending was always there. So, because it's a surprise ending, and it surprised me because I couldn't get the character to do what I wanted. And so then I went, and I was at home when I found out the ending, and I screamed, no, because that isn't the way I wanted it to end. And my husband came running in and said, what's the matter? What's the matter? And I said, my characters won't do what I want. He goes, we got to get you out of the house more. I think you gotta get out there and just see people once in a while, get away from that writing desk. So anyway, that's sometimes how it happens. So that's a long answer to a short question, huh?
Let's see how long we can do the next few. So I have a couple of questions from Haley, who's on with us. And her first question is, are there any characters that overlap from other books?
Yes. Thank you for asking that, Haley. They don't all overlap, but I am dealing right now with an option from NBC Universal to buy pretty much all my books because there are characters that overlap each one. And so they're wanting to do a cable series from it. And we've been working on that for over a year together, which has been so much fun. And they're going to do it in Salem, but the characters, for example, Towner is in, she's not in the Map of True Places, but she comes back into the fifth Petal, and she's the book I'm writing after this last one, The Island of Mothers and Daughters, is the last book in the Lace Reader series. And so it's called Bone Lace. And I'm halfway through it, but they have optioned that book too, because the character of Towner goes all the way through. The character of Rafferty goes all the way through. He even makes a brief appearance in the Map of True Places. And they all do, because they don't leave. I try to get them to leave, but they stick around. So whispering that they have more to say. So.
Then Haley's next question was, what kind of visual do you use to keep track of all the background stories, characters, range of year, overlapping stories? Do you use some kind of like a giant wall tree, or how do you keep yourself organized when you write?
I've made big mistakes with that. I'll tell you one mistake I made, because this was quite funny. And if you have an early copy of the Map of True Places, you can go see it. It's a collector's item. No, it should be. I change things. And so I do have charts of things, but I don't necessarily look back at them as often as I should. And in the Map of True Places, I changed the main character's birthday, and that would have made her mother pregnant with her for 15 months. And nobody noticed it. The publisher didn't even pick it up. But an older man in Ohio did. Thank heavens. And he called and he actually called and talked to my husband and said, is this a mistake? Or is she lying? Because I've read her first book and I know she's tricky. And he said, oh, it must be that she's lying. And it wasn't. It was a mistake, and we had to do the second printing to fix it. So, but there were 6 people editing it. No one got it. So, but that I have to keep charts. And with the Universal asked me to for a timeline, and I had to go read all the books again and make a new timeline because I couldn't keep it straight. So but I'm good on the Lace Reader books now. I know when everything happens, and Map is a little easier because it all happens in 28 to 2010, and there aren't so many overlaps, so it's a little easier.
So Jane has a question or comment and a question. Your prose feels so effortless. How much tweaking and finessing do you do after your first draft? And do you have any specific techniques that you use?
Yes, I write lousy first drafts, horrible first drafts, and messy. And I tweak my favorite. And in fact, first drafts made me so nervous that I hate them. I just try to get something down on paper, and and it's sort of, and I write X's in where I don't know what's going to happen, and then just try to go on. By the time I do that, I've got biographies for each character, pretty intense, sometimes up to many, many page biographies for each character that I write. So I sort of know what they will do in a given situation. Or I feel I should. They don't always, but I think I should know them well enough to do that. But my first drafts are terrible, and I tweak I do 6 or 7 drafts of everything and completely throw out things. As I said, the book never starts where I want to start, and every editor has found a different place for it to start than where I thought it was. I always give a little too much explanation and don't start at the most page turning part, and they find it and help me with that. So it never is anything like what I started out to do. So yeah, I think everything, my favorite part of writing is editing and redrafting. I know some of you are writers, so Anyone want to do
Steamboat.
that?
Susan would like to know, how do you give your characters their names?
Oh, well, I do like to name them after friends. Um, and sometimes on this last book, we auctioned off some names of characters. So at a charity auction, which was really kind of fun. This new one that I'm doing, it's not actually the one that hasn't come out that I just read to you from. But the character of Towner was interesting because her real name is Sophia, named after Sophia Peabody, but not spelled quite the same way because her mother wanted it pronounced the way Sophia's name was pronounced, and people were saying Sophia. And so, but she calls herself Towner, and I didn't know that until partway through the book. But interestingly, I was, I always I've done a lot of research, and some of it is on the witch trials, because of course that's sort of harkened back to a little bit, or at least referenced in most of my books. And the case I wanted to study was Rebecca Nurse, and her original name was Town, Towne. I didn't know this when I started the book, but I already had the name of Towner. So sometimes they just magically appear, and sometimes they've just been with me since the character, started, or they're named after friends. I have a friend named Susan. I don't know if that's the Susan we're talking to, but who actually got mad because I killed her off in one of the books, and someone named Susan, and she goes, "Is that me?" So it wasn't, obviously. No, I
Um,
just try to use names of people I know because I think they'll get a kick out of it.
I think we're all now, I think you can look through our Zoom names and pick any of us out now. We'd be delighted. What are some of the most unique or interesting historical facts you have learned while researching your books? And this comes from Jamie.
Well, I learned a lot when I was researching the map of true places in particular, because I didn't know a lot of the shipping history, and so I learned a lot of details of it, but even things like hadn't been here long enough at that point to know about the first candy store, and the candy being used, the Gibraltar's being used as ballast on some of the shipping, the big ships that went out and got Salem into ports faster than other boats because they were strangers bearing sweets, bearing candy. And the first elephant, the drunken elephant, Salem, all those things along the way I knew. As I delve deeper into it, I find a lot of things that don't necessarily find their way into the story, but having a sort of overview of history is good. Like what happened when. I learned a lot about the War of 1812. Haven't really used that yet. But a lot of the women's history in Salem. It's, I think of Salem as a character, and to me, it's always a female, because I think the woman's history is so strong. And I think during the shipping times, the men went to sea, and who knew if they were ever going to come back. And the women were quite independent. And I think, early education, all sorts of charity. I learned about the secret sewing circles from Reverend Jamie Bar Snell at the First Church. Told me about that, and how women in Massachusetts weren't allowed to gather in groups after the witch trials because we were considered so dangerous. So that, whether or not that has to do with the secrets of the sewing circles, I don't know. I'm fascinated by all of this, but they're just little tiny snippets of history that then become something bigger in my mind.
So then I have a couple more. I'm going to unmute Ed, who has patiently had his Zoom hand up for a few moments. I think he's still muted.
Okay,
Oh.
there we go.
There we go.
I did.
Hi there.
Hi,
Hi
Ed.
there. Oh, Brunonia, it's so great to hear you.
I have to say, Ed is the person, one of the actors who did method writing. He read my method writing as an actor in New York and gave me that tip. So we're also very
I'm going to
close.
introduce myself as a method actor, but I didn't want to spoil anything. But I also am here to illustrate that boys read Brunonia's books too.
Thank you.
You wouldn't necessarily know from this gathering, but yeah.
Thank you, Ed.
What's always impressed me about your books is, well, just one thing, your imagination is awesome, but it's also, it's the research that you said you spend about a third of the time doing. And it doesn't show,
Good.
but you know, you use the word authentic, and I think that's what makes the research pay off, is a sense of authenticity to everything, the history, the thoroughness, the detail, the description. Everything I know about Salem is from your books. So I wondered if others use your work as research for something that they're interested in. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that would be a little scary in a way, but because it's fiction. But no, no. But I do get I get questions from writers writing things about Salem.
That's what I mean.
I usually tell them they should come and stay here for a while, because, you know, a quick visit isn't going to do it. But or what to read. I'll send them to other sources, because, you know, they're always, you know, I'm a fiction writer, and as you know, I was fired from the House of Seven Gables for embellishment. so you shouldn't trust me when it comes to that. But I do tell them where they can get the information they want. So maybe
Love
it's
that
helpful,
story.
I hope. Thank you, Ed.
We have our Destination Salem executive director is on the call, and I could see her having a laugh at the idea of embellishing stories to share about Salem. So.
Well, that's what
And also, I mean, Brunonia, if you ever need a tourism director in any of your books, I'm sure Kate would gladly.
Oh, she has been so helpful. Thank you, Kate. With every book. My gosh.
We're all very lucky. So I'm going to unmute Laura once I can find her in the Zoom screens here, because she had a question that was a little more in depth that I wanted to give her a chance to say. Oh, there she goes. She's right up top. Whoopsie. Hi, Laura. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good. Hi. I'm so excited to be here, and thanks for reading that segment. I'm a West Coaster, grew up in Los Angeles, so I have fallen in love with Salem, and I've learned so much because I've had to look up so many of the terms, geography that you've mentioned in your book. So thank you for kicking off that love affair. As soon as Corona ends, I'm hoping to make a visit. One of the things I love about your writing is you have really strong female characters who've experienced some kind of violence, and yet they're not victims. But it's all your books. And so I'm sort of wondering what draws you to tell those stories.
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. I'm very drawn to that. I wanted to write books with strong female characters, because I think, you know, I think it's time. And I've been writing for so long, not that nothing was published, as I said, till I was 57. So it took a long time to get going, but that was always my interest. And I think there's a New England, New Englanders are weird, you know, it's odd, but on book tour, I would always get the question, or why are people in the Lace Reader particularly, why are they so sarcastic and mean to each other? And I would say, they're not. They will be extremely polite to you normally. If they really like you, they'll be sarcastic to you. So there's this sort of, and there's this seafaring sort of hardiness about things. And also, if you think about Salem, this was not, you know, this was the docks. This is where the ships came in. This was not, you know, a place where women could easily make it. I know I had a recent visit with the Women's Friends Society, and you know, when they were begun, it was to keep women who were coming to town and couldn't get jobs from prostitution. And so, you know, and I also connected pretty early with Hawk, and also the Women's Lunch Place. And we had an incident of abuse in our family, actually a couple, one a few generations ago and one fairly recently, that made me very interested in that, in wounded but healing people. And I mean, a lot of the people, even, I don't think there's anyone, male or female, who isn't a little wounded in my books, but hopefully they all arc and change. And it's really, I'm so glad you like Salem so much. And do you see a connection between Los Angeles and Salem? Because I do. I think it's as weird as LA. as open and, you know, when I got to Los Angeles, it was very freeing for me because I'd been on the East Coast for a very long time. And this place has changed with the times, but when I got back here, it was just about as free in this town as Los Angeles was, and I loved that. And entrepreneurial, and you know, anything's possible. I found that to be true about California, and I didn't think it was necessarily true about New England, but it's spreading and becoming that way.
And Laura said she accidentally remuted herself, but she said to let you know that she moved to Portland, so she went even weirder than California.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Good point. Another favorite place.
Many stories there. So I have one last question, and then I'll say Mary Carlin says Melanie McDonald says hi. She wanted me to pass that along.
Oh, hi. Please.
And then Deb Bird said, lovely to see you and hear your voice. Looking forward to the new book and another chat on the lake soon.
Oh, that sounds great, Deb. I can't wait.
And then I'll finish up with one last question, and then I will let our fearless leader, Kara McLaughlin, close out with a comment. She's got a good one for you. So from Laura, what are some of your favorite go-to books about Salem?
Oh boy, I read everything about Salem, actually. There's a book that Robert Booth wrote a few years back, and of course I just can't remember the title right now, but it's a great history of Salem around the time of a shipping time, and there's a murder, and that's wonderful. I read all my contemporaries, and I I read just about anything, but anything also that's sort of based on it. I've read all of the particular stories about individual people that were accused or accusers. I said we had accused in our hanging from our family tree, but we also had accusers, and no one really wants to talk about them. So it's an interesting time. I think just about anything. I read the Peabody Sisters book. I love that one. So and of course that's inspiration for strong women, isn't it? So pretty much anything that comes out. I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but I'll put some up on my website.
Wonderful. And then Kara McLaughlin, our executive director, has a parting comment for us, and then we'll wrap things up tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Brunonia, and everybody else. I just had to smile when you told the story about some of your readers going and ringing the door of the house on the Common, because it reminded me of people going to visit the Uptons and trying to get into the house of the Seven Gables. So I'm going to compare you to Hawthorne for inspiring people or prompting them to go visit the houses that inspire your writing.
That made my day. Thank you. I have to say, going to the house of Seven Gables, if you want a taste of Hawthorne, I mean, you have his birthplace, and you have, oh my gosh, just I could live there, but I haven't tried that yet. We'll see.
So now we know if we hear the alarms going off at night, it's just Brunonia Barry, no big deal.
Don't worry.
Wonderful. Well, before we wrap things up tonight and just say thank you, we wanted to let you know that we are looking at an early April reopening for our historic site, although I don't know if I want to tell Brunonia that anymore.
I'll be there.
The break-in. We'll be offering grounds passes and semi-private guided tours, and we're really looking forward to having visitors back on our site. We're really looking forward to seeing authors and artists and all sorts of people doing creative work on our site again, and looking forward to a much brighter 2021 for sure. So be sure to keep an eye on our website and our social media for all of those details. We have an amazing lineup of events, not just for this whole year, but also just even in the coming months. We have a book club meetup and a food demonstration. Both of these are online. So even if you're keeping it weird in Portland, you can come and join us here on the East Coast in Salem. We would love to welcome you. And our website and social media has all of those details. A great place to stay in touch is our email list. So you could certainly join that list as well. And, just we wanted to thank, of course, our speaker tonight. Big round of applause, claps, and the reactions. Such always a delight to be able to host you. Next time, we'll be able to have you here and in person, which will be amazing. But we just also wanted to thank again all of our members who are online tonight, who make programming like this possible for us to share. Thank you to our staff and board members who joined us tonight. It's so lovely to see all of you here as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon. So we appreciate your presence here tonight and look forward to welcoming you back to the Gables in one way or another. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thanks.